I think we do have to hold on. I don't know. I mean, if we did it like this, would people in the back feel comfortable that they're hearing everything?
Move further here in front. Move forward. Get out here, man. Move forward. Wait, that doesn't.
But then we'd also. So I don't know whether we should use mics or not. Mics. I think people will be more comfortable with mics, so they don't have to stress out about it. I am going to turn my phone on silent. That's embarrassing.
No. I don't know what phone is, but do you know what
We did, they just weren't electrical.
We called them diaphragms.
Yes, our speaking horn. The Edison speaking horn we had.
Welcome everyone to A Steampunk's Guide to Sex. We are some steampunks, and this is our guide to sex. More? So we're gonna need some volunteers from the audience. That was way too quick. We'll figure out how it goes, and maybe we'll end up with that. As a more specific introduction, we're Combustion Books. My name is Margaret Killjoy. This is Matilda. This is Professor Calamity. We are the three people who run a publishing company called Combustion Books. And it's, worker run, no bosses, all that fun stuff. And we are publishing a series of books. The first of these books is called A Steampunk's Guide to the Apocalypse, and it was primarily authored by me before this series began. But then we realized how much we like this model, and then we realized how much we like sex, and some other stuff. So collectively we decided, no, actually I was, anyway. And so for example, some other upcoming titles that will be coming out from us will include A Steampunk's Guide to Death, Crime, Drugs, Magic, Madness, and Revolution. And so each of these books will feature kind of two main parts. We believe, one, that steampunk is on some level based in Victoriano, or at least things of that time period. But we also believe that steampunk is definitely modern and is definitely part of our lives. It is our subculture. We're not stuck in the past. We're not even stuck fake recreating a past. We can do that when it appeals to us. And so one of the main things we talk about in the books is we do talk about, and that's actually mostly what we're going to talk about tonight, is Victorian sexuality and all the crazy shit they got up to. And most of the history is actually researched by these two fine people. And then the other half of it or so is more of a DIY section. And in this case, it'll include, we actually take these things seriously as much as we also enjoy the fun of it. And it gets into things like consent culture and about, things like polyamory and kink and these things that can or cannot be part of your lives. I would absolutely hope that consent would be. And I totally understand why the con felt like it was necessary to make this event 18+. We actually we actually wish it didn't have to be, because as much as the people in this room need it, I would actually say that sex education has totally failed in this country. I don't know if it's somehow magically gotten better since I've been in high school. I'd be very surprised. I mean, you all went to high school. No, and you all went to high school and they taught you that it's okay to be asexual, okay that it's okay to be queer. No. They explained about consent and I don't understand. No, they didn't go over useful polyamory. Huh? No, that's interesting. Yeah, no one. Our culture doesn't teach us some of these really fundamental things, and it's actually really fucked. No pun intended. So that's actually the other part of the book. We'll be also talking about that. And of course DIY will also include DIY bondage toys, and actually we have someone doing a steam-powered vibrator and the diagrams of how to make it.
That sounds dangerous.
It probably is.
But it's not dangerous, you're not doing it right.
And none of it is going to be happening here tonight. Aww. It's going to be a very, very PG kind of talk.
Everyone leaves.
Right.
But we are going to talk about the crazy shit Victorians got up to, which I actually don't really see as PG, but that's okay.
This is 18+, come on.
So I think that's enough of my introduction, and we're going to move to Professor Calamity.
Hello, I'm Professor Calamity. We will be discussing how Victorians invented sex. I know you all think you did, but it is not true. The Victorians invented sex as we know it in all its variations, kinks, everything from genital piercings to
sex toys.
Sex toys. We will demonstrate one of those sex toys. No. We'll need a volunteer who's not afraid of electricity or Tesla coils.
All the hands stayed up.
I like it. I got my eyes on you. You're seeing it. So we're going to talk about that, and we'll be talking about various aspects, and then we will open it up for questions, and hopefully we'll be able to answer because we've been studying. I was going to say studying sex. We've been studying Victorian 19th century sex.
They won't let me come over anymore. Oh, we have to do our work. And I'm like, I want to
we have to experiment a little. It's science. You won't understand it.
It's all for the sake of science.
So, she's like, yeah, bring it on, science. You know you're at a geek convention when people clap around science when there's sex talk. You know, it's like, yes!
That would be the best last words, the best climactic words ever.
So,
we just go, science!
Progress! All right. Okay, so getting serious about sex, which is very hard sitting up here. So, I said that the Victorians invented sex. Obviously, they did not invent fornication. And in fact, many Victorians had a real problem with sex. In fact, if we were holding this, 200 years ago or 150 years ago, there would be nobody in the audience. They would not have thought this to be appropriate. In fact, I'm not sure I feel this is appropriate, but we're going to do it. And
you probably would have ended up in jail.
Yes, like Oscar Wilde and many others. Yes. So Victorian sex, and we're talking mostly Western society, so Europe, and America, Canada, but also in other places. But we'll be talking about Victorian sex. They did not talk about it, but they did it a lot. And they did it in very interesting ways, and they invented a lot of things that we think of as more modern versions.
They were bored.
Yes, they were bored. No internet back then. So, and you can only get so far as, carrier pigeons and Morse code. You have to occupy the rest of your day. So, I do want to talk about some of the things that we think are more modern that were actually invented in the Victorian age. And part of this has to do with just the technology, mass production, being able to master metal science. Brought in a lot of this. And it was a paradox, because the Victorians were also people that did truly put doilies and trouser legs on pianos during certain concerts, afraid that men would get aroused looking at piano legs. I'm looking at you right now. But, so they were very concerned about sex, though they didn't talk about it that much. They certainly wrote a lot about it. And writing about it was fine. It was getting it out to the horny public that was quite difficult, since it was illegal. And that's kind of where we come in, actually, why we first got interested in the topic. Okay, not the reason we first got interested in sex, but the first time
I had to explain it to them. They've been married for a while.
When we first got interested in this topic in a steampunk kind of way, is that the Victorian pornographers had to be quite ingenious to get this stuff out to the public. And actually, the people that were writing radical political works were also the pornographers. They were smuggling in continental stuff from more liberal places like France and the Netherlands and Switzerland, both political tracts and pornography. But pornography, as we understand it, literature solely to produce lustful feelings in people, really is a Victorian idea and a Victorian term. Pornographic actually first comes about around the 1830s and 40s as a legal term and a term used to describe it from other types of literature. Now, lots of things we wouldn't think were pornographic they found pornographic. However, that doesn't mean there isn't really hardcore, steamy, Victorian pornographic novels, and there were. They tended to be mostly focused on kink, which we'll talk about in just a bit. So what are some things that we think we invented, or the modern age invented? Well, one is genital piercings. I think, okay. All right, now I'm looking over in this direction. I like this group better. They're much more like, okay, we're here for a history lesson. And I got this side, it's like, yeah, genital piercings, piano legs, let's do it. So nipple piercing, for example, for both men and women, started in the Victorian age. In fact, you could go to jewelry stores and buy different chains and things that were called pedal piercings. Because they couldn't say the word nipple. It actually became a short-lived fad. They even hung bells on it. It tended to be for wealthier women and men, but mostly women, and poorer women could not afford this. The reason for the nipple piercing was that it was supposed to inhibit sexual pleasure. It didn't explain why these things tended to be sold at the same place that you could buy other sex toys, but these were legal to sell, where descriptions of nipples, even using the word nipple, was a jailable offense. Okay? So nipple piercing, there's a whole culture of nipple piercing that occurs between 1840 and 1850. There are other genital piercings, like piercings of the scrotum, piercings of the clitoris, and these things were all